my distinct pleasure to introduce Dr. Catherine Kerr this afternoon from Brown University. I'm not going to take much time from her talk. Her bio and information is in your pamphlet. So she's going to give us a bit more of the embodied perspective on contemplative practice, and her talk is entitled Neuromechanisms of Body Awareness and Contemplative Practice. Thanks, Catherine.
Thanks, Wendy. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is really exciting for me. It's all new material, so at certain moments I might appear to dissociate or something like that, so just cut me a break. Okay, so I am really, really excited to be here today and to be talking to this group about embodiment in contemplative practice. And I know that it has in the past been a kind of underrepresented idea, and I feel like we're sort of the ones who get it on some level, so that's very exciting. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So I first started thinking about the questions that I'm presenting to you here today when I was in China at a Chinese meditation Qigong center in 2006. I was doing 12 to 15 hours of practice a day, and the practice helped me regulate an underlying immune system cancer that I've had since 1996. And I have to tell you, I was filled with confused, swirling thoughts because I just received a 5-year NIH grant from the NIH to study the neuroscience of mindfulness and embodiment. And the grant was supposed to use fMRI, which is the most typical brain science technology. It's what everyone uses. And but the grant required that I have a mentor because I was learning new methods. So I went and I met with my neuroscience mentor, Christopher Moore, who was then at MIT and now is at Brown. And Chris is a bit of a mad scientist. And he said to me, "No, you're not going to use fMRI. You're not going to use a technology that has established methods, established software, and a large community of users. Instead, I want you to be ahead of the field." He said, "You're going to study how waves and rhythms in the brain form these sort of cloud-like networks that come together and then break apart on a moment-by-moment basis. These are electrical rhythms. And you're going to study how these networks sculpt and create the context for everything else that happens in the brain. And he said, you're going to study how mindfulness meditation reshapes these waves and rhythms. The math and the signal processing, math, can you hear me? The math and the signal processing is incredibly complicated. It's going to require you to write your own MATLAB scripts using advanced wavelet analysis. And you're going to have to invent and build a new device for lightly, automatically stimulating people's toes." And he said, "Good luck." And that was right before I went to China, and my jaw dropped. As if he'd said, "You're going out in the ocean in an open boat with a harpoon and some water." And he did end up finding some people to help me, but it was really hard. And you have to understand, I had just learned how to use Excel software. So this was a pretty big step for me. Anyway, right after I learned about this new direction, I went to China. We finished the study, and it was finally published in 2011. It was very daunting and exciting. And what I'm about to present to you now has the same feel to me. So what I'm going to talk about today are two linked brain mechanisms related to body awareness and contemplative practice. And I'm going to describe the brain networks that are involved, and then I'm going to present a neural network model for thinking about presence. The first mechanism focuses on alpha wave modulation in primary somatosensory cortex for mindfulness meditation, and I presented on this numerous occasions. I bet almost everybody here that I know has probably seen me present on this, so I'm going to go pretty fast. So that's the first mechanism. This is alpha, and that's woman on the right is the person who rescued me and helped me do the study. Chris helped too, of course. This is going out on the internet, so. So basically, we wanted to look directly at building a relationship scientifically between body awareness and brain function. And so we zeroed in on a practice that we thought was really relevant, which was the body scan in MBSR. Since, as many of you know, MBSR, the first couple of weeks, people basically engage in moving an attentional spotlight across the body to each body part, shifting the spotlight through the body. So, working with the group at MIT, we focused on the alpha rhythm, which is a 10 hertz rhythm, so it goes 10 times per second, and it pulses over large portions of the cortex, especially sensory cortex. It's an electrical current, and there are a lot of different ways of understanding alpha, and that's a representation right there of the alpha rhythm on the slide. For us, alpha rhythm is this incredibly highly localized set of volume switches that block information from traveling from the thalamus to the cortex. And what we wanted to see was whether MBSR enhanced people's ability to use attention to turn the volume knob up or turn the volume knob down, depending on the context. So in other words, if I tell you to attend to your toe, can you do it? And when you attend to your toe, can you change the alpha rhythm in the body map of the toe? That was the question. Everybody get it? Okay. Using magnetoencephalography, we recorded the brain's faint magnetic fields, and we did a small randomized study, and we found that mindfulness did seem to give practitioners better control over the alpha rhythm brain switches in the brain's primary map of the hand. So the point here is not having high alpha or low alpha, it's having flexible alpha, being able to meet the situation that you need to be in. Okay, so you might at this point ask yourself, oh, that's great, big deal. Most people don't practice mindfulness to control the alpha rhythm in their finger map. Would everyone agree with that? So I'm going to tell you why this matters. Okay, this is our study and it's our result. And now here's why this matters. So basically there were three network principles that sort of emerged from this. The first was that it turns out that these alpha dynamics of these volume switches in primary somatosensory cortex, the same volume switches are in auditory cortex and visual cortex. And it turns out that there's kind of these network effects where, the sensory cortices actually collaborate with one another, and the alpha might become raised in a joint fashion. So it's not just, I pay attention to my toe, but you're actually orchestrating a suppression, a broad suppression throughout all of your sensory maps of the other sensations. Does that make sense? So an attentional spotlight isn't just paying attention, it's also ignoring. And alpha is the network for ignoring, basically. Okay, so the first principle is that this seems to generalize across sensory cortex. The second principle is that this same training generalizes up to encompass regulation of thoughts. And the third principle is that spontaneous sensations arising during practice may play a calibrating role in maintaining the network volume levels. So I'll talk really quickly about those points. What we've learned is that, and this is a recent study in depression, actually seemed to validate these ideas. So our study was the first to kind of broach this, and in 2013 we published a review that put this framework together. So what I'm telling you right now is a sort of hypothesis framework that is receiving validation as we speak. There are now, I think, about 5 or 6 studies that are supportive of this. And the one that's most direct is a study of MBCT for depression. And it turns out that in depression, people with depression don't regulate their alpha baselines well. So they use alpha to suppress something, and then they don't return to baseline adequately. Or they get a stimulus, and then there's a kind of a tricky thing that happens after a stimulus, and they don't return to baseline. So basically, this is a sort of systemic network problem that seems to be involved with some difficulties these people may have in their sensory processing. And it turns out that MBCT seemed to remedy these problems. It changed the way they regulated their alpha baseline, and that change was correlated with their change in depression scores. So that's really pleasing to me, because it really does seem to give some validity to the framework that we published. Okay, so, and I could tell you about 6 other studies that do that, and I would say the probability that we're right is at about somewhere between 75 and 88%. That would be my guess, which I think is really high, actually. But we can talk about that later. Okay, so the other thing that we found out about this alpha rhythm is that you use it to remember things. It turns out if you want to remember a number, you have to turn down your sensory cortex. Does that make sense? People who are not good at controlling rhythms are not good at remembering things. Okay? So what I want to remind you of is that MBSR starts out with this really granular sensory attention, and one of the gold standard outcomes is it seems to reduce risk of depression relapse, which has nothing to do with granular sensory attention. How does that work? We're proposing this mechanism, which is that by learning how to work with sensations, you get better at working with thoughts and emotions. Okay? That's the basic idea. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's a network effect. Okay? So those are the principles that I went over with you. So at this point you might say to yourself, well, what about the body? Why body awareness? I mean, you could do that staring at a wall, right? And yes, that's true. And except that body awareness has this advantage in that you are the observer and the observed, right? And it may be that this dual aspect enhances regulation of the network. And part of having a network is that you're constantly needing to adjust and calibrate the appropriate sensory loudness or volume setting for each part of the network. Right? And as I told you, in depression, there are poorly regulated baselines. Their alpha rhythms are not properly calibrated. It turns out that working with body sensations during something like the body scan may be a way of calibrating baseline sensory loudness of sensory inputs. And so what do I mean by that? For example, if right now you just hold out your hand and shift your attention to your right hand and just attend to it, you may feel sensations there. Raise your hands if you feel something. Okay, I'd say maybe, who didn't feel something? Okay, so it's about 100%. Or whatever. Okay. And these sensations might include tingling, a sense of warmth or coldness. And here's the basic idea. Feeling the sensations in the hand that your focus elicits gives you perceptual feedback signal to know that your attention has landed in a way that staring at a wall is not going to do. Okay? The sensations give you a feedback signal, a signal for calibrating the system, the relationships between the parts of the system. And the reason we think we know this is from a study by Kieran Fox and Kalina Christoph, which found that mindfulness practitioners' reports of spontaneous sensations during the body scan were actually calibrated quite closely to the primary somatosensory cortex canonical field sizes in the hand map, in the lip map, in the foot map. Their sensations were very, very correlated with all of the ratios of those different areas. And for normal people, their sensations were totally random. Okay? So it looks like there's some calibration that's happening there. That's advanced mindfulness meditators. So here again are the 3 networking principles that we extracted, that training in the attentional spotlight generalizes, and body awareness generalizes across sensory cortex. It generalizes to other sensory modalities, and a way of saying this in Buddhist speak is it helps you control the sense doors, right? That's That's the idea, and that's an idea from Buddhist psychology. This same training in regulating the attentional spotlight generalizes up to encompass regulation of thoughts. And that's something that a lab in San Francisco seems to be replicating some parts of that very nicely. And then the last part is that the spontaneous sensations arising during practice appear to play a calibrating role in maintaining network levels. Okay, so that's mechanism number one. There's another mechanism that I'm not going to talk about, which is interoception, which is the perception of deep, visceral, emotional sensations related to breathing, digestion, heartfelt emotion. These are all encoded in the insula. Okay? My colleagues, Wolf Mealing, Cynthia Price, Norman Farb, and Anne Klein will be discussing this at 3 o'clock at a panel that I recommend. Interoception is an important body awareness mechanism, and I'm not going to talk about it. Right. So neural network mechanism number 2. This is extending our approach into a 3-dimensional multisensory map of the body space. So we all know that body awareness is not limited to the sense of touch or to our awareness of core sensations. It's also involved with how we move through the world, how we stand, how we hold ourselves, and how we relate to our immediate environment. How do we perceive ourselves in the 3-dimensional space that surrounds us right now? And let's see if we can take a moment and sample the immediate space. What does it feel like right around your body? Right around your body. How does that space feel? How does it relate to the feeling of your body's insides? It's an interesting question, isn't it? So it turns out that there is a representational map in the posterior parietal cortex that holds together this 3-dimensional space and also includes the space around the body, immediately around the body. It's in the intraparietal sulcus. This is a higher order integrative map, encodes multisensory 3D body space representation, includes the internal space and the immediate space around the body. It's basically a 360-degree hologram of the body that gets encoded in the PPC. It turns out that this multisensory map receives inputs from the insula, from primary somatosensory cortex, motor cortex, premotor cortex, and visual areas. And these inputs relate to movement, touch, intention to move, visceral sensations. They also relate to looking at your body. So everybody kind of like look at your arm and really like look at your arm, okay? So when you do that, there's an area called the extrastriate body area, which responds to, selectively to body, looking at bodies, and that gets activated. Now, you might want to ask yourself, what's the difference between looking at your arm and feeling your arm? Think about that. Okay. So our recent work has focused on seeing whether this dynamic network of regions that I told you about performs differently in Tai Chi practitioners than in normal people. And we chose Tai Chi based on our earlier studies showing practitioners had enhanced touch acuity, and also because it seems to improve sensory motor processing, especially in the elderly. And there's a panel at 3 o'clock that I am on with my students where we're going to go into this work in detail. So, interestingly, one of the main tools that people have used to look at how this network functions and how it integrates body awareness information is the rubber hand illusion. So it's too bad it's not Halloween. The rubber hand illusion. There. See it? Okay. All right. So the rubber hand illusion is possible because the 3D body map gets inputs from touch, movement, and vision, and it blends these inputs together to produce this holistic experience of the body. So the rubber hand illusion test probes this experience, and the probe involves taking a fake arm, putting a fake arm on the table, and concealing the person's real arm. So
there would be a fake arm set right here, and then my arm would be off to the side or something.
It would be covered up. okay? And what you do is you stroke the fake arm and the real arm at the same time in a synchronous pattern. And the shared sense of timing for most people actually persuades them that the rubber hand that they're looking at is their real hand. What's up on the screen? Oh. So yeah, it's pretty weird. The illusion is uncanny. You feel a rhythmic touch stimulus on your concealed arm. You see the same stimulus delivered to your fake arm. And what's happening is the visual stream is overriding and capturing the tactile and proprioceptive streams. So all of the information that should be coming from the sense of touch is pushed aside and vision takes over. And you think that the fake arm is your real arm. And the term that's used in the science is interesting. What happens is you disown your real arm. Okay? So we did a really small preliminary study in Tai Chi. And what we did was we focused on a group of experienced Tai Chi practitioners who had between a few hundred and tens of thousands of hours of practice. And like I said, in a previous study, we found they had a better sense of touch. And we were specifically interested in whether advanced practitioners would demonstrate an ability to stay with the touch stream even when this visual information was being presented. Okay? So, and what we found was that the more hours of Tai Chi you practiced, the less likely you were to report visual override and capture of the tactile embodied experience. Okay? Experienced Tai Chi practitioners stayed with the sense of touch. They were not fooled by the visual illusion. So the cultivation, I guess I should show you a figure, like a scientific figure. Okay. Okay. The cultivation of this capacity for staying in the tactile stream, even when visual external information about the body contradicts it, suggests that Tai Chi practice suggests that Tai Chi practice is associated with changes in the 3D body map in the posterior parietal cortex and with changes across the network. So the network is, where's the network? Sorry. Okay. That's the network of regions right there, and the yellow region is the three-dimensional body space map. Okay. So what does this mean? Well, we've collected some other data that gives us some additional clues about what this might mean. Specifically, we found that there is a correlation between rubber hand performance, how much vision overrides touch, and a metric that is a rhythmic neurophysiological network measure like the alpha rhythm. It's called the beta rhythm. It's 15 to 30 hertz rhythm. So let me tell you a little bit about this beta rhythm. You see this 15 to 30 hertz beta rhythm across the entire sensory motor system, including the brain and the muscles. And if everybody kind of imagines picking up an egg and holding it, okay? And imagine it being pretty fragile so that if you push too hard, it'll break. Can everybody try to do that? Okay. Just something that's incredibly fragile, all right? And if you have to be precise with your two fingers, with your finger and your thumb, that's when beta rhythm between the muscles gets very, very synchronized. And the reason is it needs to collaborate. The two muscles need to collaborate in the task. Does that make sense? Okay. So, but it's possible to do the task without having the synchronization. So I'll tell you about. What's your prediction about advanced Tai Chi practitioners? Just curious. Okay. So high beta is involved in carrying out static hold tasks that require precision. But low beta facilitates sensory processing and seems to facilitate awareness of sensory experience. So what we found in a small subsample of our Tai Chi practitioners was a very strong correlation. The more more you were able to stay with the tactile sensations in the rubber hand illusion, the lower was your beta rhythm. So what it looks like is that, because remember, lower beta is associated with sensory processing and awareness of sensory experience. So they're able to do this precision task while leaving the tactile stream on. Does that make sense? So the tactile, the embodied information is still being received even during a kind of complex motor task that doesn't require it. So, and remember that high beta coherence, which makes your muscles act in synchrony, you almost make your muscles into a clamp. They start acting as a unit. It means there's a loss of freedom between the two muscles. Low coherence states actually have more freedom between the opponent muscles, and it's a network state that's more open to tactile and sensory processing and more open to contingencies and surprise. Okay? So this is a pretty small exploratory component of our study, but it's very interesting, and I'm going to use this data because obviously we need to do a larger sample, and we're going to need to replicate this before we can say that this is a proven fact. But I want to describe the model that we're building in more general terms, because this has led us to form a broader theory, which is that advanced Tai Chi practitioners are more present, by which I mean they are more able to maintain a sensory motor network flow from of tactile and proprioceptive information into the three-dimensional body space. And they're not overriding that with vision. Okay? There's more information that's being sent to the higher order. More embodied information is going to the higher order body map. Does that make sense? Okay, good. So what's the payoff for this model, you might ask? How will it help us understand Tai Chi in contemplative practice? So to answer this question, I'm going to talk about three really, really different cases where presence, what I'm calling presence, should matter. These three disparate cases are as different from each other as they could be. The first case is aging. So let's start with the canonical Tai Chi finding. We know that Tai Chi prevents falls in the elderly. And our results and our models suggest that Tai Chi is associated with staying in the tactile stream and not using vision to process embodied information. So let's take something very simple, an elderly person walking on an uneven surface. So she likely has decreased tactile and proprioceptive inputs into her basic spatial 3D map, because this is what happens as we age. And increasingly, she's using the visual sense to maintain her balance. But this is not a good strategy for her. It makes her movement control a little bit virtual. She is not directly in touch with her environment, and she is at increased risk of falling. We know that Tai Chi is useful for elders. It reduces their fall risk and increases balance. And here we are offering this as a possible mechanistic basis. Increased tactile and proprioceptive information are integrated and fed forward more effectively into the 3D spatial body map. And when this happens, we can say that the sense of presence is increased. Okay? Okay, example number 2. Eating disorders. Where else does the sense of presence matter? Well, let's look at where it might be lacking. There are groups that are that perform differently on the rubber hand illusion task. We see this in studies of women with eating disorders. They have a much stronger response to the rubber hand illusion. They have a stronger identification with the visual stimulus. And more generally, people who have externally driven models of the self, this is the self of appearances, the self that shows up in social interactions, these people have a stronger rubber hand illusion. And we would say they are less present, according to our model, less present in their bodies, according to our definition. This example shows there are psychological inputs into this embodied mechanism. The last example is from something that's much closer to home and closer to our community, which is a problem that has received some attention in the last, I would say, 6 months. And I'm thinking of the work especially by my Brown colleague, Willoughby Britton. And I think the model of presence might be helpful here. And that's this problem that there are some people who, when they do mindfulness meditation, experience dissociation, depersonalization, and distress. Has everybody heard about this sort of, this possibility, basically? It's unclear why this might be happening. There may be a history of past trauma, but what we would hypothesize is that when this happens, those practitioners are shutting down their proprioceptive, tactile, and visceral sensations and not feeding them forward into the posterior parietal cortex, the 3D body map. Did I say patient? Well, I'm talking about people in a meditation situation who develop depersonalization. This can happen to such an extent, some people report that it feels like you're having an out-of-body experience, and it can be accompanied by a sense of a deeply frightening loss of the sense of presence. So this is stuff that Willoughby has her, what used to be called the Dark Night Project. I think now it's called Varieties of Meditative Experience. And so she's collected some qualitative accounts like this. Now, the reason I'm talking about this is because I think our model actually could be very helpful for understanding what might be happening. And I believe there are very practical approaches that people have been using in contemplative practice over the last years to help people who might be at risk with this depersonalization dissociation response. For example, my colleague Cynthia Price, and that's her, has developed a protocol of touch-aided mindfulness. Isn't that interesting? Touch-aided mindfulness. And of course, Bessel van der Kolk emphasizes the importance of contemplative movement practice for people who are at risk of depersonalization or dissociation. So our mechanistic theory would suggest that in some people where these lower level inputs are not being fed forward, that doing this contemplative practices that also involve touch, movement, attention to posture might help remedy this tendency towards dissociation and depersonalization. So that's just, I'm trying to kind of describe some of the potential payoff for the model. And so I presented these 3 different cases: fall risk and aging, eating disorders, and depersonalization. And what holds these disparate cases together is that each of the different types of embodied contemplative practice involving touch or movement or whole body attention could be used to enhance this network feed-forward processing. So I'm just going to summarize again. Presence is something that's missing in some patient groups. It seems to be a kind of integrated network process that takes place when low-level inputs are strongly incorporated into the posterior parietal association area. And the significance of this theory extends beyond Tai Chi and may help us model a range of other contemplative mind-body practices. For example, Buddhist meditative traditions stress the importance of attention to posture. In Zen, for example, there's a lot of attention to posture. And that is a form of whole body attention. It's the frame of the body. And it is sort of inherently a spatial form of attention. And when that happens, this 3D posterior parietal map gets invoked. So the model that I'm presenting here may help us start to operationalize some embodied contemplative practices that have been seen as too esoteric or too marginal to model. Okay? All right, so I've been pretty nervous, so now I'm going to relax for a second because I think I'm getting close to the end. I'm usually not a nervous speaker, but this material is new for me, and it was actually pretty difficult to write, so it was an interesting experience. So, I wasn't fishing, but thank you. All right, so going back to the 3 network principles that I described before, where is that? Okay. Training of beta dynamics in the sensory motor network by modulating awareness of sensations during movement, during postural observation, may retrain across the entire network. So I'm trying to make this parallel to the earlier thing that I said. It also may generalize up to encompass regulation of 3D body space representation. Okay? So that's what I've been talking about, this sort of basic tactile proprioceptive information getting sort of sent up to the the higher area of three-dimensional body space. So before considering the third part of the model, which addresses the role of spontaneous sensations and what they may do in calibrating the network system, I want to take what might look like a detour and consider how this body space model might be involved in neuroimmune interactions. Could the neural network-related enhanced presence I described above, associated with Tai Chi, be linked to better neuroimmune integration and more adaptive immune response? Well, the rubber hand illusion gives us some clues. It tells us what happens when your arm is disowned. So this is based on mechanistic work by Lorimer Moseley in Australia, who, by the way, doesn't care about contemplative practice, so that's good. Means he's a very unbiased source of information. And what he found is that when you disown your arm and identify with the rubber arm, temperature regulation in the disowned part is affected. So you enter the rubber hand illusion, your real hand temperature goes down. And not only that, your immune inflammatory response in the real arm goes up. And there appears to be spatial specificity in these responses. The temperature response only happens in the disowned arm, not in the rest of the body. At the same time, there's an increase of histamine inflammatory response in the disowned arm. So let's think about this for a second. What does this mean? Here is how a recent review by Marcello Constantini describes what might be going on here. Response to the rubber hand illusion is linked to the individual's immune system, the immune system's ability to differentiate self from non-self. During the rubber hand illusion, the immune system treats the concealed hand as a foreign body part, as demonstrated by the increased histamine reactivity. These data suggest a biological link between bodily self-consciousness and the immune system. So let's recall the findings. Temperature decreases and histamine response increases in a spatially specific manner when you disown your arm in the rubber hand illusion, and it's correlated with how intense the illusion is for you. So other groups have extended this finding, and so we can put a little bit of confidence in this mechanism. There appear to be important regulatory relationships between the 3D, or at least correlative relationships between the 3D body representation and homeostasis in the body. And they have done studies where they temporarily knock out this region, and it seems to make people colder. But those studies, no one trusts those studies. So. Okay. Anyway, it's called, yeah, forget it. If the rubber hand illusion causes disembodiment and immunologic dysregulation in the it causes disembodiment and immunologic dysregulation in the disowned arm, can we say that embodied contemplative practices like Tai Chi may work to enhance presence and enhance basic sensory inputs into the 3D body space, may push in the opposite direction? They may also push towards re-embodiment and enhanced immunologic regulation. And that more generally, the 3D map of the body space, which Constantini refers to as the bodily self. Okay? I want you to, if you don't remember anything else from this talk, hold in mind that idea that there is a bodily self. Okay? That this bodily self may also map some immune function. And the title of this talk is Bodily Self and Immune Self. Is there a link? So this is incredibly speculative, what I'm telling you right now. I mean, Constantini's idea. Not the temperature and the histamine stuff, that's not speculative. But what I'm about to say is very speculative. No one in the world agrees with me. So I'm trying to give you, like, this is part of our science education thing, like, how accepted is this idea in the literature? And basically, we went from accepted this much, accepted this much, accepted this much, now we're accepted this much. Okay? And that's what you guys should always be looking at when you read something in the newspaper. You should be trying to guess at how normative is this finding, how accepted is it, and is it just a one-off study? Okay. So what we're doing is we're building a model for a research agenda for the next 5 to 10 years, and so we haven't proven this yet. So I'm presenting some sort of early stage ideas. So the bodily self and the immune self, is there a link? So a full treatment of this question is beyond the scope of today's talk. I will say that we know that the slow motion contemplative exercise of Tai Chi and related practice of Qigong seem to enhance immune function in some respects. For example, antigenic response to flu vaccine in elderly practitioners is enhanced. And it also appears to be useful in people who have autoimmune disorders. But the full impact of Constantini's idea comes from considering this 3D body space map as containing online immune system information, or as being a workspace for immune system processing. This idea puts the spatial phenomenology of Tai Chi practice, which includes spontaneous sensations, in a new light. So let's now consider the third part of the model about spontaneous sensations. Spontaneous sensations appear to play a calibrating role in maintaining network volume levels. And remember, we talked about that in alpha. Okay, so reports of these sensations include tingling, pulsing vibrations, sense of flowing movement, rapid changes in temperature, telescoping of the entire body, increased sense of physical connection to the environment, including connection to the ground. So this is something, just feel your body space right now. The space in your body, the space immediately around your body. Just check that out. See if you notice any kind of interesting feeling. So just as in mindfulness, there's now a little bit of interest in these spontaneous sensations related to practice. And according to our model, these sensations may be a marker of a certain type of neuroimmune interaction, or they may anchor our attention in the body space where a neuroimmune interaction is taking place. So I'm not going to elaborate on that right now, but I'm going to tell you that my interest in this started with my own experience and observation in China at the Qigong camp. My visits to Qigong camps have exposed me to an incredible range of somatic experiences and also some interesting immune regulatory experiences, including a high fever that seemed to spontaneously arise over a 20-minute period, going from like 99 to 105, and then just as quickly over a 45-minute period once somebody came and realized I was going to go to the hospital if they didn't treat it. They're like, oh yeah, okay. And they did some stuff and it went away. And they were like, this happens all the time. So, okay, so that's an anecdote. That wasn't science. These and my experiences using these practices over 2 decades for an immune system cancer have led me to be interested in these questions. Specifically, I'm very interested in new ways of investigating pre-scientific folk theories from Asian mind-body practices. Because I think these different spontaneous sensations during practice relate to another domain that seldom gets talked about in our community in public, which is something that's referred to loosely by the term energy. It's called prana in some traditions, lung in the Tibetan tradition, and it's called qi in the Chinese tradition. So that's something that we're going to focus on and that we're going to kind of build a model of. And I just want to leave you with sort of the grand question. What if early teachers and practitioners had some insight into immune processes, into the relationship between the bodily self and immune self? And what if this 3D spatial representation, this online body spatial field, has this complex moment-by-moment function. It helps generate the feeling of presence, which that actually I think is low-hanging fruit. That's true. And I should tell you a story. I was walking across campus with someone at MIT who just won the National Academy of Sciences medal, and she ran into someone else, an older gentleman, and she talked to him for a couple minutes, and then she turned around to our group and she said, "There goes one of the few scientists at MIT." Think about that. Okay. So what if these teachers and practitioners from back in the day had some insight into this moment-by-moment function of this 3D body space, and the stuff about presence, and what if this pre-scientific folk theory of qi is something that we could investigate in a tractable way? That's the direction I'm going to take in my work over the next years. Putting this talk out as a kind of a marker, I'm hoping to recruit others to these questions. And I'll leave you now with a picture of me meditating with my group in China. And here we are leading the mind rhythmically back and forth from a focus interoceptively to exteroceptively. Interoceptively, exteroceptively. We did that for 2 hours. So it was a really interesting experience, and someday I'll tell those stories. For now, I'll just thank you for your attention. Right up against our time, so if people need to leave, that go ahead. I won't take it personally. And I guess what we'll do is, Wendy, maybe we'll do 5 minutes of questions. Okay. Oh, but feel free to leave. Okay. Yeah.
During guided meditation, I am instructed that if there's any discomfort in any part of the body, focus my attention on it, breathe into it, and after a while, the discomfort or pain goes away. And it does. And I'm also told not to analyze as to why this is happening, but I have to analyze it anyway.
Of course,
My question is, if I do that, am I actually increasing the blood flow to that part of the body, and that's why the discomfort goes away, because the blood moves?
Probably not. But we don't know the exact answer to that question.
Can you repeat?
Oh, right, sorry. So the question was, if you experience discomfort and you breathe into the discomfort, are you changing the blood flow in that area? And the answer is, I don't know. I think that it might be, unless you're doing something very fiery, it might be a subtle effect. And it may be that there's something happening in the brain and the body, and it would be great to get a better, more rigorous handle on that. I have a colleague who works on that question actually, and she's actually says it's very hard to have a real gold standard answer to that question.
When you were talking, I guess you were talking like guarded terms, and you mentioned things like calibrating the network system, generalizing up, retaining like benefits across the entire network. Are you then thinking that just by training deeper sense of embodiment could radically improve all of your cognitive and emotional functioning as well?
I think it would be very context dependent. Oh, sorry. I'm not used to this. Basically, what the fellow said was, if you embarked on a very far-reaching, high-dose program of embodied practice, would you expect that to translate into cognitive gains? And actually, I can punt that to my colleague Peter Wayne, who looks at the effects of Tai Chi on cognition. There is some data on that. It's in more elderly people, so it's a slightly different question, but it does appear that certain types of practices, I don't think it could make you into a genius, but I mean, there is data that it improves it in interesting ways. Sorry that I can't be more definitive.
When you mentioned the rubber hand illusion, I was thinking about tantric practices where instead of being fully aware of your physical body, rubber is a body of light that you imagine is your own through deep practice.
So using the imagery of a body of light in tantric Tibetan practice.
And you purposely identify with the body of the deity as your own.
Do you feel it? Or do you just see it?
Well, you start seeing it, and then
But do you incorporate it into your body representation?
right. Well, that's the answer, I think.
I mean,
Because
go ahead.
Sorry, my sense is that by using this prosthetic sense of self,
Yeah.
people get really embodied, even aware of a subtle body and being able to regulate very subtle functions. So I was wondering if this body of light had its own map, or was the same map but in a subtler level.
Well, of course we don't know the answer to your question about whether the rainbow body has its own brain map. And I think that anything that is this three-dimensional spatial representation is likely to involve the area that I spoke about. But one thing that's really interesting is we're learning a lot about really early multisensory connections between brain areas. Like in the first 200 milliseconds after a stimulus, there's an incredible, surprising amount of collaboration between like vision and touch and stuff like that. So if you visualized a rainbow body in your posterior parietal cortex, there, visual areas and extrastriate body area would probably get involved in a very dynamic way. That would be my prediction.
This is slightly, it's on topic, but slightly off. When you were talking about the prosthetic arm, I was thinking of hemiplegia and people with stroke, and I was wondering, especially when you talk about the fine calibration with placing something very delicate, and I was wondering if you were aware of any studies rather than going the traditional kind of neurodevelopmental model and doing more sensory sensitivity training, body scan, etc., with people with stroke or hemiplegia. Is there anything that you're familiar with? Or
I would once again punt to my colleague, Dr. Peter Wayne, because I don't cover that literature, and he's actually going to be speaking at 3 on our panel. So you could motor imagery, which is it's not like the Tai Chi people could have patented and trademarked these techniques. I mean, they're universally available techniques that every epoch has had some access to. They just formulated it in a specific type of way. So it's not surprising that other groups would also be involved. So I'll do Laura and then Wendy.
Yeah, just quickly related to that, there is work on the rubber hand solution with amputees and with people with rheumatoid arthritis, and it temporarily releases pain, and so that could be related both to your question and also related to the immune system hypothesis.
Oh, that's interesting.
So,
Wow.
yeah, we can talk
Oh,
about it.
cool. So yeah, there may be the negative side of having too much self-embodiment in certain types of pain syndromes, potentially.
Yeah,
a
and
certain type
also,
of
I mean,
embodiment.
really with the, both with the phantom pain and with the rheumatoid arthritis, where the fingers are in a different
Right.
position, so it's really remapping the map of the body that makes sense both visually and...
So this was a question about, what was the question? Oh, about stroke and sort of what are some less conventional approaches to stroke. And Laura Schmalzel, who just answered the question for us, is the moderator at the 3 o'clock panel. So, and she's done some she's actually a great rubber hand illusion scientist. So. Wendy. They're definitely, the Samueli Institute is very involved in measuring, I think, faint magnetic fields and sort of esoteric frequency measures that come off the skin that are maybe frequencies that haven't been of interest to scientists particularly. I'll tell you my 2-second approach to that is, if there is chi, it should be visible and it's ubiquitous. and it has health impacts, it should be visible in some of our existing ways of looking at things. If it isn't, then there's something wrong with the model. So I tend to be kind of a conventional thinker, and I'm not following that the development of esoteric measures as closely.